And welcome back. If you have been joining our webinar series, so this is the number 34th webinar that we're having. So we're doing a bit of an experiment. So we've got some feedback that more interaction will be welcome. So we have opened the chat function. Typically, we would just have the Q&A going, right? So we have more than 100 people now with us. We say hello to everybody. It'd be nice to see where everybody's from. Right? Are you able to say a hi? Oh, Northern Ireland. Hello, Laura. Nice of you to be here. And I just also want, as people are still streaming in, right, that to say that, we used to have the chat on, but then we got feedback that it was actually being a distraction. So then we actually turn it off. But then, of course, learning is social. So we're doing a bit of experiment, and we haven't really had the chat on, but we want to see if that facilitates the learning. So we'll have everybody experience that. Or is it more of a distraction, right? Hi, we have some friends from Myanmar. Welcome, right? Nice of you to be able to join us, right? And I think, feel free to drop a message there. Hello, Singapore. Yeah, that's where we are. So it's nice, Shireen, and Thailand. That's great, yeah. So we have quite an international crowd, and always thankful for your support. But I better get going to the main topic, yeah. So we'll just leave the chat open. Today is the second of a series that we're talking about supercharging your child's learning. So the last time we were, we mentioned, we discussed, the different high impact techniques, right? Like flashcards versus rereading as a technique, right? Or, using a multisensorial approach, for example. So today we are really looking at revision. So how should we be revising for best exam retention? So we're talking about certainly a long-term kind of retention, So I'll elaborate as we go on. Now, if we're meeting for the very first time, just allow me to do a quick intro. If you have been joining us, please bear with me over this part, right? So I'm Cheryl. I'm the founder of BrainFit. So we are an entity and we are interested in building brain fitness, right? So by that, we mean memory, attention, and, learning and better emotional regulation, stronger mindset, resilience, etc. So all these functions really stem from the brain's processing. So I'm trained as a pediatric physical therapist, and I have been working with the brain for a very, very long time now. And I have two girls myself. So, and they teach me so much, my own precious assets, I always say, that I'm nurturing. So you see that we have quite an international presence here. Hi, we've got friends from the Philippines as well, yeah. And that's because BrainFit has grown from Singapore, but we are now, in the different territories that you can see on the slide. So we have also got our panelists from the different countries, different BrainFit locations that are supporting us. So we deliver our programs through our learning centers and also schools that we work with in Singapore and outside as well. Hello, we've got somebody from the UK. So you see, I'm getting a bit, I'm I like the chat, but I think I should put it away a little bit so I don't get too distracted. Yeah. So multitasking is not great for the brain, right? So here you can see, but please keep the chat going, yeah. You can see that we have some of our locations. So we have offer programs, from babies as young as 9 months all the way to older people. And in some locations, we run a preschool as well, including the one in Singapore. So here you can see some kids in action, and these are some awards we have won and some of our partners, in the field of brain science, but I won't go into that. So let's get into the topic. And we are talking about revision habits tonight, right? As part of the Supercharging Your Child's Learning series. And we are discussing with the idea of retaining to take exams, right? So I'm just going to have a poll. We usually have a poll, right? Let me pull it out. It's a very simple poll. If you were a parent or a teacher, with whatever information that if you're a teacher, you might not know, right? Whether your child or your student uses a structured revision schedule, like a plan. Is there a plan? I guess that's my question. Or no, typically it would just be cram sessions before an exam, or you have no idea, right? Or, it's not applicable. Perhaps your child might be too young. Okay, I'm just launching the poll. Can you see it on your screen? So if we can have some participation, just to have some ideas, of what are our kids doing, right? And then we'll share the results in a little bit. Okay, thank you. Right. So we've got, we're coming up to about 50%. No, just wait a little bit more. Thank you. Thank you. It's nice for a speaker always to have the audience participate in something that's measurable. Right. So, okay, we're coming up to about 70%. I'm just going to hold on for about 30 seconds. Yeah. And then we'll close the poll and then we'll look at what everyone's saying regarding this question. So do children, have, or students, do we have a structure when it comes to revision? Okay, I'm going to end it right now and share the results. Yeah. Okay, let's have a look. Can you see the results? Right. Okay. So we are talking about, so we have got about 25% that is no idea or not applicable, and then split rather evenly, I guess, a little bit more cram sessions. Yeah. So 40% versus a 35. So about even. All right. And then some not quite relevant or we don't know what's going on. That's very interesting. Yeah. So, but it's nice to hear that there is a structure for some students, and certainly that is how research is pointing us towards, in that there are things that we can do, and having a structure is part of that, to improve our long-term retention. Okay, so for this evening where I am in Singapore, I want to talk about two things really. So one is, with the research that we are understanding now, we know that cramming is not a good strategy. In fact, when you cram, it might be effective, okay, I have to say, for the exams. Okay, so this is what we know. So yes, people can have and rely on their short-term memory, so they can have good short-term memory, and they rely on that to get through an exam, but the long-term retention is very weak. That is why I think students are still cramming, because obviously it works for some, right? But the issue is that, are you learning, or are you doing your study, your cram, just for the exams, or are you truly learning? Okay, so that's why I think we need to visit this whole idea of, are we studying to remember, right? For the learning effect, right? Like we want to know something, or are we studying to get through an exam? Okay, because cramming as a strategy for the exam, people may not dispute that, it is ineffective. But for long-term retention, yes, the research is showing that it's not good. And of course, the second point, let's talk about what are then some of the best revision habits, what research is telling us for long-term retention. So let's go on to the first point, right? So it's quite interesting. If you Google exam stress comic, right? I mean, or anything on the internet, there are memes, there are funny things that's going on, so how are the finals going? So it's obviously, associated with a stressful period. Did you ever have the feeling of impending doom? So that's the finals week has arrived. So it is a period of heightened stress, right? Sorry, this is not a very clear image, but you have medical professionals that is kind of like, talking about examination phobia as a condition, a form of performance anxiety characterized by fear, worry, tension, and even feelings of physical illness, right? Psychosomatic symptoms. And these are very, very real, where kids are having headaches, they can't breathe, they can't sleep at night. So the stress factor is very real, right? It is like a recognized thing. And obviously, we know that stress is not conducive for learning, okay? So I think it is important to have a conversation with our students, right? And I think, the adults, or if you're a teacher especially, you will know all of these, right? But what is really the exam about? And I'm talking about this from the point of view of the communication to the student, right? Because we're having all these anxiety, because an exam at the end of the day is just a measure, I think. Yes, there can be high stakes, right? It can determine whether you get a job. I mean, you get into a dream school, get into a certain course, which could determine your future, right? So high stakes exams certainly can be very worrisome. But I think more and more testing exams just have a stressful impact, on the children, or just the mere mention of that. But I think, to put things back in perspective, it is really just a measure of learning, right? And then if you look at learning is good. So at the same time, on the internet, you look at, being, being educated, having knowledge. People associate that with power. And you have all these positive talks around learning. So there's a big contrast, right? So when you Google about learning, right, all the encouraging words come out. If knowledge is power, then learning is a superpower, by Jim Quick, right? And so there's all these encouraging statements about why we need to learn. And now we're talking about lifelong learning, right? That learning should never stop, right? We should keep growing. But yet, when you Google exams, it's very negative, right? It's really about kids who are depressed, they are stressed, they hate it, they have no life, you know, they go into this deep hole for this period. Yet they are really about the same thing, right? So I think the important thing, and to revisit whether you are a parent or, you know, you're a teacher. And I do this with my own kids. My older daughter is in grade 4, she's 10, right? And in Singapore, that's when you start having more serious exams, right? You kind of start from grade 3. So then, you know, we want to have, you know, we want to put exam in the right place. I think that's what I'm trying to say, right? And it should be more positive, that is aligned with learning, because learning ultimately, I'm sure we all agree, is something that we want to encourage our kids to do, right? We would, I think we unanimously agree that it's a good thing, right? So it's something that we see in a positive light, and we communicate to our kids in a positive light. But then exam, which is a measure of that, of a good thing, is then so terrible, right? So I think there's a bit of a paradigm that we need to shift as a first thing, you know, to get the right perspective. Because if you can lower the stress level, number one, our kids are going to perform better. I mean, stress and performance just are inversely correlated. I mean, yes, you can have positive stress, the adrenaline that makes you, you know, just perk you up, and you're more vigilant and all that. But when you get into that, you know, psychosomatic stress, you know, that kind of state, then it becomes negative. So we have positive thoughts about learning, but I think extremely negative thoughts about exams, right? It's something that we fear, it's something that we dread, yet it is a measure, right? And is it really necessary to measure? You know, a lot of people, parents talk to me, and you know, and they expect me to disagree with exams. No, I am a believer of exams, because I believe that if you can't measure it, you cannot improve it, right? Obviously, is one high stakes setting the best measure? We can argue about that, probably not. You know, that's why we talk about portfolios, project-based, ongoing kind of assessment. I think it's all important, because yes, there's real anxiety, and in the one setting, kids may not perform. But that doesn't mean that a test or an exam is bad, right? You need to know what you know or what you don't know. It is just a measure. Like if we're trying to lose weight, we got to go onto the weighing scale. Otherwise, how do we know that we're on the right track, right? That, you know, whatever we're doing is working. So, and this is what I tell my children all the time. It is just a scale for your learning, right? Don't have to be worried about it. Your exam is your friend, right? It shines the torch on where the learning gaps are. Okay. But yes, I agree. Yeah, in certain exams, it has a huge potential influence on what could happen. It could be very discouraging, right? But I think on an ongoing basis, if we are having this kind of discussion and the kids are framing it in a most positive way, I can tell you we are already going to get better performance and a healthier mentality. Okay, so that's why I want to open this discussion. I know we are here for techniques and strategies, right? And we want to get to them. But I really do think that part of the issue is putting exams in its right place. And I think it should be put in a positive place, not a negative place. It should be something that we look forward to. Yes, with a little bit of fear, perhaps. I mean, maybe not fear, excitement, maybe more than excitement, a stronger feeling than that, right? But not necessarily anxiety. But, you know, it's like, okay, yeah, we've baked a cake, right? And now your guests are about to eat the cake. So you have a little bit of the anticipation. It could be good, it could be bad. I don't know, right? But it should be not a moment of fear and crushing anxiety. I think that's what I'm saying, right? And and so I mean, I encourage all of you, you know, if parents, if you are having kids who are sitting for for exams, right? Have this conversation with them. And I think it's an ongoing basis because there is a lot of pressure as a whole that, oh, you're under exams. I mean, you talk to my daughter, her birthday is around the exam period. She says she doesn't want to have a celebration because nobody will be in the celebration mode, right? She wants to do it after. So I think as a society, I think exams come with a pretty negative connotation. And I personally would think that it would be a lot better if we shift it, such that the focus is not so much about how well are you doing in exams, but really, have you learned? Don't you want to know? I want to know whether I have learned, and what is the outcome, right? So it's not about that, but hey, how are we doing? Let's go into that scale. Let's do this thing and find out how are we all going, right? And where are all the gaps? Okay, so so that's my little introduction, and to close off this before I go into the strategies part. So this is funny, right? 2 weeks before the exam, you have your little stress coming and then 5 days it's growing, 2 days, it's really coming up, and the night before you're crushed. Okay, so I'm now going to go into revision strategies and techniques and habits, right? Cramming, like I said, for some works very well for short-term retention, but you have to be very, very mindful that not everybody will be suited for that because of the stress level. So when you are stressful, is a part of your brain called the amygdala, which is your emotional brain that's firing rapidly. And it's because of this immense firing that's going on that can, give you all these psychosomatic symptoms, and that can create a blackout, a blank mind as you go into the exams. So if you talk about kids going in and then they tell you that I can't remember a thing, like my mind is completely blank, that's real. That's real, because when your amygdala goes onto overdrive, your frontal lobe shuts down. That's your thinking, cool, rational brain. Just because it's too much wiring, there's too much firing of the neurons. Okay, so you need frontal lobe to work. That is the CEO of the brain. It's helping you with working memory, to think, to pull information from your long-term bank, and then put your answer in a coherent fashion. Right, your thinking brain needs to be able to work. Amygdala cannot go into overdrive, right? So some kids have that meltdown episode in the exam hall. Some kids have that before the exams, right? So stress, we know, right, is just not conducive to learning. However, as I've mentioned, cramming could work for some people because you can rely on short-term, kind of like memory to get through an exam. Yes, especially, the child is calm enough if you have a solid short-term memory. I remember I probably did that a bit myself as a student, right? And I used to, tell some of my friends, whatever I learned on the bus on the way to school is the best, because it's really solid. And then if it comes out, man, I get the best score. But you only hope that topic comes out, right? So you can count on that. But then if you ask me 2 weeks later what that topic was about, I would not be able to tell you a thing. So all that time you are putting into these cram sessions becomes zero. Okay, so especially if you are needing the information. Now in Singapore, if I'm talking to Singaporean parents, every level counts. Some of you may think that my child's only in grade 1. I think it's fine. We don't really need to worry about that. My recommendation to you, having seen the curriculum all the way to primary 6 at least, and secondary school, every level counts, right? Really, in Singapore, I mean, one of my feeling is that we don't spiral as much, meaning that we don't revisit old content. Therefore, you got to be solid with every level of content. That means, as a parent, I want to know that my test for that level is going solid before I go on to the next level, because I'm not going to be really visiting it. Now, if you have that kind of curriculum, and of course, learning is like that, learning builds on past learning, then cramming will not be a good strategy because you would have forgotten. So all the time you might have spent in the last final 2 weeks cramming is not going to serve you going into the next grade. right? Because you don't have the prior knowledge. You're going to have new knowledge come in. So learning is about growing your knowledge. You start small from a preschooler, right? You learn how to learn, then you have little bits of knowledge and you grow it, right? But if you are learning and then you are forgetting because the strategy is just short term, you can't grow it as effectively, right? Your time becomes wasted, which is the argument. You might be able to do okay in the exam, but in the longer term, it's a complete waste of time. You have come back to zero because of the issue on long-term memory. Okay, let me just peek. Oh, we don't have, it's quiet. All right. Okay, let's move on to, feel free to put any questions up on the chat or the Q&A. Like, we've got, some of my colleagues who will help you, but otherwise we have Q&A session at the end as well. Yeah. So let's get into then what are the scientists saying? Then how should we be doing this to really make learning be a good use of time, right? That we are having good retention so that we can grow this knowledge, as much as we can. Now, if you were here in my webinar 2 weeks ago, I showed these slides, right, where I talked about the 3 parts of the brain, 3 kind of different functions that are needed. Number 1 is your recognition networks, where that's your engagement with the material. So you're sitting in the classroom, you've got to process what the teacher is saying. So that's your auditory processing. You've got to look at the diagram, look at what the teacher is writing on the board. You've got to link the information. So that's your visual processing. That's your touch point with the material, bringing the material into your mind at the initial level. Okay, so that's your recognition networks. And then you have your strategic network. So when you have information now that you're thinking, now you're going to start pushing into information into long-term memory, right? So that's when you have the different techniques. So the last webinar, we talk about some techniques being better than others in pushing information into long-term storage. And of course, there is your emotional brain that's going on, your inner talking, your mindset, right? That's telling you, oh, this just sucks. I'm not good at math. It's horrible. I'm not interested. Or this is a stupid subject. Why do I have to do this anyway? Right? So if you have this kind of conversation going on, it's very hard for these areas to work, right? So every part of this got to be working well. What all the inner conversations, all your working memory, your attention span and focus and bringing in the information, all your thinking faculties, okay, I get it. Now, how am I going to retain it? Right? You're studying methods. So tonight, we remain talking about at the strategic level. All right. So this is a 4-part series. So we have spent the last webinar talking about strategies, but today we're just talking about real revision, right? Where you have an event or you just learning. Okay, let's not talk about the exam event. We are learning for good. We want to store for good. We want to know that information for good, right? And 10 years later, I'll still remember how to solve, this kind of problems. We want that kind of learning. Then we were talking about the strategic level. And in the next webinar, we've got 2 more in this series. So we've got 4. We will be talking about the cognitive recognition networks, right? That's your working memory, your attention span, all very important as well. And then in the 4th one, we will be talking about your mindset, your emotions, your motivation, and that's so important as well. All right. So they each have their place. But let's look at retention. I showed this slide before as well. Now, if you have any new information, when you are first moving it into your brain, it's really your working memory, your thinking, your engine memory. Your working memory is trying to make sense of information that's coming in by relating it to old information. So the brain is trying to find, okay, I'm learning about a new planet, all right? But what do I know about the solar system? You're trying to link it and form the concept, right? So you have all these cells talking to each other, and then they form your planet network, okay? So then you know that, okay, this new planet belongs to my all the other planets that have learned about the solar system, for example. So this is your working memory, right? So the encoding stage, you're learning. So you need your cognitive skills, your attention span, to be on task, at this phase a lot. Of course, information can get lost. You're not paying attention. You're dreaming. You are talking to your friends. You don't get any of this learning. Okay. But then once it gets in, you got to retain it. Okay. So that's when you start to consolidate and then information gets forgotten. Okay, now when we're talking about exams, it's really at the retrieval phase. So now when we test, exam is a test of retrieval. Can you retrieve all these that you have learned from here to here, right? But if you look at the stages, there are the different processes in the brain, right? Information gets through to get into long-term storage so that eventually at any time you can retrieve it at ease or you have forgotten it, okay? Or it maybe never registered in the first place. So there's different skills that's responsible for different parts of the chain of information processing, right? Moving from new information into your long-term storage. Now, I'm going to talk about 3 strategies here. So right now, there are many other strategies, but I can tell you at where we are now, this would be the highest rated 3 strategies and habits if we want to build, right? And of course, we don't have much time, but let's go on to the most impactful, right? Let's get to the top of what scientists right now know what can be done, right? And I'm going to tell you, this is 3, SIR, is the SIR, all right? So it's spaced repetition, interleave, revision, and retrieval practice, right? So if you have heard of them, if you're practicing them, that's great, right? Because certainly these ones, I would think, rank at the top in terms of the evidence, in terms of what brain scientists and psychologists are now recommending more and more of the way we should be approaching learning. We're looking at how the brain learns and then applying it. Remember, teaching doesn't mean learning. Learning is a retrieval, right? You must have the child be able to retrieve. You might teach, the child might not learn. All right. So, but the exam is a test of learning, not, I mean, of course, teaching influences learning, right? But the child needs to have those skills as well. Okay. So teachers are very, very important, but teachers can do so much, right? And yeah, and in order to benefit from the wonderful, effort that the teachers are giving, then some of these strategies and techniques, right, can further enhance that. Okay, so we're going to look at each of them. So we'll start with spaced repetition. Spacing just means you spread out revision. You just spread it out, meaning if you have 2.5 hours to learn, you're going to do 2.5 hours on the weekend. You are better off. It will be more effective. And this is research based. So they tested all this in the lab. You break it down to 30 minutes and you do it Monday to Friday. You're comparing. Obviously, you can say that I don't have 30 minutes on the Monday to Friday. Now, that's another issue, okay? So we're just saying that, okay, and obviously, we are wanting to make this work, right? So what the research is also suggesting, I think, is not hard to do, meaning that you can have short sessions, right? And can you then squeeze out the 30 minutes? It's a question, right? Or even 20 minutes. But what they're really finding is that if you space it out, the retention is better. Why? Because in between, you have forgetting. Then you struggle to recall again each time you come back. And each time you do that, you know what? You consolidate that memory and entrench it. And the handshake, I talk about the memory is the handshake, is the talking between brain cells in the brain. So they're shaking hands, right? So when you forget, the handshake breaks. When you remember, it's a tight handshake that's maybe forever not fused together. All right, it's formed a good solid long-term memory. So what they're simply saying is that if you learn all in a 2.5 hour setting, right? If I test you in 2 weeks' time, your handshake is not as robust, right? As if you are breaking it down. Because each time you're studying, remember, you go to sleep, you will forget a bit. But the second time it comes back, you're forcing yourself to make the handshake again. And then it forgets. And then you're forcing yourself to come back again. Okay? So this is what we understand about the effect of spacing now. Can I just ask, is on the chat, is anybody using this? I mean, I just want to know, are these new to people or are these already familiar? Can we have some participation from the audience? Right. I mean, I'm just curious, really, a yes or no answer. So it's a yes or no question. Are you using this? Yes, no? Anybody very conscious of no? Okay, thanks, Veronica. Appreciate. Don't know about this, Grace. Thank you. Yes, thanks, Rachel. That's great. All right. So no. Okay, thanks, Junie. Yeah, don't know this. Yes, Sabrina. Yes, no, didn't know. Okay. So we've got some yeses. That's great. Learning the first time. Yes, using it. Great, Sunita. Thank you, Ginny. Yeah, okay, city, that's great. Heard about the height, but never tried before. Okay, yeah, it is a big height, right? Okay, thank you, thank you. Yeah, this is quite nice, right? Yeah, 40 minutes a session in my school. Great. Gregorio, that's great. All right. Yep. So yeah. So using it with your students, great. Terence, thank you. Child not always willing. I'm going to talk about that as well. This is not necessarily easier, right? And I'm going to, I have a comment on the strategies. It is not necessarily easier, and it's because when you forget and you come back, it's hard work to try and recall. But that is absolutely the effort. The act of trying to recall that is making this process more successful. All right, but we can talk about that a little bit more. But yeah, thank you for everybody's answering of that. Right. And so now this is really fighting the forgetting curve, right? So Ebbinghaus is a guy, so we have the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. He's a scientist. He studied memory and he realized that our forgetting is very rapid, right? Within an hour, we're down to 44%. We just don't retain information well, all right? I mean, because information is not necessarily relevant, why should I learn about fractions, right? I mean, the brain tunes into it, things that are important for us, and we are tuned in to survive, right? Fractions, that doesn't really help us to survive. So maybe we don't put great emphasis on it. So we don't retain information very well. So what spaced repetition does, so in this blue line is your forgetting, okay? So you are naturally forgetting. This is not abnormal, yeah? This is natural, but you are forgetting. So what they're suggesting is that immediately after the class, you recall perhaps, right? And then 24 hours later, you can go recall again. 1 week later, you can go recall the same information again. And 1 month later, and by this time, you can almost be sure that you have a high level of retention, and they're suggesting about 80%, right? So a much better retention. Things are moved from your forgetting curve all the way into your long-term memory because the brain has had many opportunities to form this handshake. Then it becomes a good friend, right? You don't want to let go of your handshake, okay? So this is what we're understanding about memory and how we can remember information better. Okay, now I find this hard to do personally because we don't always have, some days my daughter is so busy, they've got CCA, extracurricular activities, right? And then they've got assignments. How can we immediately after the class revise? Because she's coming back at 5 in the evening and she's tired, right? So I think this is hard. So in BrainFit, we use another strategy. And this would be on the internet as well. Different people have different strategies, right? But the idea is that you space it. That is the same. But do you necessarily need to do it 24 hours and 1 week and all that? I think you can if you can follow that. But to me, we need to be able to apply it easily. So this is something that I find it much easier to apply. We do that at BrainFit, right? So we basically just have new information. So I talked about using the flashcards last week. So this is flashcard and retrieval practice is a real wonderful companion, right? Complements each other beautifully, right? So assuming I'm going to use flashcards, and it need not be flashcards, it just means you are revising, right? Whatever you don't know, do not assume that you know, okay? A lot of times we just have our kids do corrections, okay? And then we assume that, okay, you've done the correction, you would know it already. Now, if you have a math problem, for example, you have the child corrected, or a science problem, and 2 weeks later, you ask the child the same question, I can tell you it's a very high chance that the child might make the same error. An error means that a connection is not yet made, or it's a faulty understanding, okay? So it's a faulty connection. It's not a connection that we want. Just by doing a correction, are we going to then have that handshake form permanently? Yeah, for some questions, if it's memorable, learning a past tense of, run is ran. Yeah, maybe I won't remember, I won't forget that. But if it's learning a certain concept, right, that's complex, right, then the risk of having just doing a correction, and then making the same error again, I think that's very high. So that's when you need to be deliberate. That's what we talk about, mindful learning, smart learning. We're going after the error points, right? Not assuming that with a correction point, all things are well. And then we get a shock and then we get upset with the child because they have forgotten the correction. We expect them to forget, okay? I think that's what we should go with, because that's how it's normal to forget. So what we want to do is to then slowly push information into the long-term memory. All right. So what we do is that we have a flashcard folder, right? So it's a little it's a special folder with certain number of pockets, right? And you will have the flashcards that you first learned in the first pocket, right? And then you will revisit it, and it could be a week later. It doesn't matter. Now, if you have information that's very hard to remember, between the number one and number two, the time should be shorter. Okay, like for my daughter, she writes a Chinese word or an English word or grammar rule that she doesn't know. She pop it into the flashcard. I typically will review maybe in about a week's time. I wouldn't have the time to do it the next day, and neither do I have the organization to keep track of every single thing so closely. So we just kind of do a flashcard practice. So everything just get moved along. So it's something that's already in level, the pocket 2. By the time I get to the next week, I want to try and push it to pocket 3 and to pocket 4 and to pocket 5. By the time you pass pocket 5, I can tell you, I personally use it with my children. I think the retention, I reached about 98%. I have a stack of flashcards here. Now, can you see this? So this is my daughter. She's in grade 4, right? So this was her starting, and these are all her Chinese. This is just Chinese, right? Her mother tongue language is Chinese, right? And all the words that she didn't know, week by week from the beginning of this year, she would create a flashcard, right? If she made an error, we go after the errors. We don't assume that the correction will help her. We make a card with the right word, right? And then we would use this strategy, right? I can tell you that this stack was created by end of May. I remember it because it was about 80 cards, right? And I took it out, and because we had a mid-year exam, right? And then I flashed it all. About 80 cards here. I think all the ring can take is about 80. I return about 2 cards. So that gives me a 98% long-term retention. And some of it would have been since January or February. Okay, so that's what I want. You learn so you can use it. I'm growing my pie. I don't care if there's an exam. I'm going to continue to do this. Honestly, the exam to me is irrelevant. I mean, it's a measure. I mean, as in, it's relevant because it's a good measure, but I'm not studying for the exam. Okay, and in my household, that's very clear. We are studying to learn. Even in the absence of the exam, this is exactly what I'm going to do. Right? I am going to learn, and then I learn with how I know about how the brain learns. So spacing is something I highly recommend. I mean, the research is very strong for it. So what it means that you have to develop regular study revision habits. You have to create your touch points. All right. And that's why I always say, exam prep should begin from day one. The moment you start to learn, you have to start to revise because you will forget. Forgetting, let's expect to forget. I think when you come from that, and I come from that angle because I just work with the brain. So to me, forgetting is the given, right? How do we expect her to remember? I don't think she'll remember. I won't remember tons of information. It's not directly relevant to my life. I mean, a lot of these academic content, right? Of course, we try to make it relevant, but come on, I mean, right? A lot of these concepts, I mean, how does heat energy flow? I mean, does it really affect her life? No, right? On a day-to-day, of course, we create that interest, that curiosity, that connection. And of course, we continue to do that. I mean, I think you get what I mean, right? So, but, if we revise, right? And then we're attempting to store these, information into the long term, in a more kind of scientific way. So even short revision sessions are fine, okay? But you create more recall events, okay? So every touch point means you have a retrieval practice. Okay, now have sooner first recall for hard material. I mentioned that. So timing between first and second recall, shorten it if you find that it's a very hard fact to remember. Or then you can go into your strategies, as I mentioned last week. You can go into multi-sensorial, you can go into dual coding, right? You can add into that piece of information that's hard to remember. Okay, and by doing this, I can tell you that I have my daughter's information at my hands. I know what she knows, and I know what she doesn't know, right? What is easy to forget. So that also you are really keeping a closer tab. And I can tell you that involves about half an hour of my involvement a week. Yeah, so it's not, I'm a working mom. I'm very busy running Brain Fit, right? My daughter has no tuition except mother tongue, Chinese. My husband doesn't speak Chinese, so he thinks it's really important. But she doesn't go for tuition, right? But I mean, I think it's important that she learns how to manage her own learning. And that's worked well for us. Okay, I need to move on. Now, the second would be interleaved revision. Now, this a space, or I'm going to ask the same question, whether anybody is using that, or have you even heard of it? But what is interleave? Interleave means you jumble up revision topics, meaning that you versus revising one topic for an extended period of time. I'm going to use a Singapore, which is called block revision, by the way. So it's interleave revision versus block revision. This is the kind of words we use when you read the research, right? So it means in the Singapore context, I think the Singapore parents will understand me. That means you are choosing a topical workbook from popular bookshop, right? We have a national curriculum in Singapore. So all the schools, pretty much run on the same curriculum. So it's the topical where you are doing fractions, one topic, length, one topic, decimals, one topic, right? Or specimen paper kind of books, right? Where you're sitting for past year exams. Okay, so that means interleave is your past year exams, topical is your block, and they see superiority in interleave. But we need to talk a little bit about that, just to clarify that. Is anyone familiar with this? Sorry, can I do the same question? Right, Elaine, you used this method when you were studying, right? So back then, no screen time, true. Is anyone familiar with interleave? Yes or no? Answer again. Never heard of this? No? Yes? Okay, great. So we have some no. We have probably a bit more no's. Yeah, so this is a bit newer. Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, familiar but not using. Okay, so a lot less, I would say, than space. Yeah, so space is certainly a lot more popular. Which type of assessment book is better? Anything that covers the curriculum, then you need to look at what your child needs, right? Not really, except for practice papers. Okay, thank you for interacting with me. All right, so this is newer. Now, this is what it means, okay? I just took this from the website that talks about block and interleave, right? And the research that's supporting that. Blocking means you're studying decimals. Then I'm doing a lot of decimals. And I say that because my daughter is in P4. She's doing decimals right now. All right, last term she was doing fractions. Okay, so earlier in the year, she was doing maybe, factors and multiples. I'm thinking math, yeah. Or you can think heat, okay, or light, or magnets, okay, life cycles as a topic. So you are learning that and revising topic by topic. That's called block revision. Interleave means that when you're revising, you are jumbling up these topics, okay? So it's not neat, right? But however, there's a few points though. Blocking is probably good in creating fluency, okay? And now this is just a nice slide that shows you, straight after revision, do you know that kids who does blocking actually does better? So if you are cramming, yeah, okay, and if you are studying in the last minute, blocking is quite a good strategy because your immediate retention is good if you block it. That means I'm doing a lot of decimals. This entire time I'm doing decimals together with the school the whole time. That's a block kind of style. Your immediate straight after revision retention is actually better than interleave. But you know what? 1 week later, see how much it has dropped. Your retention is not as good as interleave. Jumbling up, the kids don't do as well immediately, but they retain for a longer period. This is what you're seeing. So I think there's a place for each of them, right? So, and students usually prefer block revision. That means the topical papers, right? Because they may make more mistakes with interleave revision because when you're jumbling concepts, right? And when you're doing topic, it's very clear. This is all about factors and multiples, right? Whereas when it's a jumble up, you don't even know what strategy. So it is more challenging from that sense. And some of the material might have been learned a longer time ago. So there's more time to forget. So interleave, the children may get a lower score, meaning that if you're going to revise using topical papers, right, they might, score better than if you use past year papers. However, students retain better longer if you use interleave revision. So you can use both, yeah. I personally do initial learning with block revision. So let's say the teacher is doing decimals. So I'll make sure that my girls do so I have different assessment books, actually. I have the topical ones, but I definitely have the specimen ones. I like to go into the specimen ones very quickly. As long as she knows the fundamental decimal concepts, I don't do any more block revision, right? And that's how we will recommend if you're in BrainFit and how we've designed, some of what we do, right? So then once you are clear of the concept, you go into block. You're going to interleave, meaning that she's also revising length and whatever, right? Guess and check strategies, everything else. Okay, hard. If you're a teacher, this will be hard to implement in school, I think. I mean, without seeming chaotic, right? So I think probably better implemented at home. Yeah, but like I said, block revision might be useful for last minute, right? You just kind of go into what you're weak at and use short-term memory and then cram. But remember, retention is not as good. Okay, but there is a place if we're cramming last minute, obviously. But if we're talking about long-term, then let's look at some of these better strategies. Okay, so that's your I for interleave. And the last is retrieval practice. Retrieval practice, I think a lot of us will be doing it already, meaning that you are testing recall from memory. Okay, so your assessment books is a retrieval practice versus studying. That means reading the book. All right, that means reading my notes. So I'm just going to reread my whole notes or copying my notes. Those are not as effective. Get them straight into the exam test paper would be more effective. Anybody just consistently using that as your revision? That means you're always testing rather than reading. Can we have a yes and no? Just seeing, again, it's good. What was everybody doing? So yes, yeah. So I would expect a lot more yes, right? Yeah, okay. So some no's, right? So you're going sometimes, okay. Yeah, so yeah, obviously if you don't know the topic, you got to go back to revisit it, yeah. Okay, but the moment you know it already, then if you think that you're rereading, the content and going through again, it's not going to help the retention as much as practicing retrieval. Okay. All right. Yeah. And again, my daughter is resisting. We need to talk about that. These strategies are good, but they are harder, than what they like to do. We must acknowledge that. Okay. But then maybe explain to them why it helps them, right? In the long run, it's just going to be more helpful. But we don't want to just say, no, that's just the way you do it. But I think explaining and have their buy-in, probably helps. All right. So yeah, like I said, I think this is probably more common. Yeah. So this is really a practice at the retrieval stage, the recall stage. Okay. So do what can you do? You can do a whole bunch of things, which I'm sure you're all already doing. I'm sure teachers do that as well. You have your pop quizzes, your practice tests. You have your flashcards. Flashcards, that's why it's a retrieval technique, because for flashcards, it's not the making of the flashcards. Of course, the making is the encoding. But it's not that, it's the retrieval. It's asking yourself, look at the word, oh, can you remember the vocabulary? It's that process that we want, not the card itself. Not, and of course, obviously, you making it helps with the encoding rather than you just buy a packet of flashcards, right? You're writing on it, that's multi-sensory, it helps you. Now, mind maps is great. If you're copying a mind map, that's not retrieval. If you are drawing a mind map from memory, that's retrieval. Okay, so just to clarify for you what's retrieval and what are some of the good practices. Obviously, you got to start with drawing a mind map first, all right? So when you come to Brain Fit, right, we're helping you with getting all the concepts together. You got to form all the concepts first. That's the initial learning. Here, I'm talking about pushing all the initial learning into long-term storage, all right, is where the emphasis is. Or you can write down notes from memory, etc., to help you with the retrieval practice. All right. So yeah, so I think that would be about all. Great. I am 9:20. I'm not overtime. Hopefully, we won't run overtime today. So just to summarize, you want to spread out revision. So that's your S, your spaced repetition. Number 2, you want to jumble up, right? When you have the fluency, when you already know the concept, right? Then you can go into past year papers, and then you want to test recall from memory, right? Better than if you already know the topic, better than going back and reread and rewrite your notes, copying it, make them nicer or highlight. No, then don't do all of that. The time, the 1 hour, now we're talking about studying smart here, right? Time is the big equalizer, right? We all don't have time, and neither do we want our kids to spend forever on the studying. We got to study smart, right? It's all about that. Our hours are precious. Let's make every hour count for our children, which is why we're talking about these strategies. Okay, so we want to have the best, most high impact ones, so that the storage can be more as successful we can possibly make it to be. Obviously, information will be forgotten, but we want to do as much as we can, right, to push it in. Okay, so that would be the recommendation currently. What we know from science. So now I want to talk about this point, okay? Learning researchers recognize that these strategies aren't easy or fun to put into practice. So I want to address all the conversations just now, not consistent. My daughter doesn't want to do it. She resists. It's very real because it is harder than if they cram. Then if they use block practice, for example. Why? Because they are using a different strategy. It's a short-term strategy. Okay, that's why the retention is weaker. So it's the sweat that get us the recall. No pain, no gain. That saying is a bit is quite apt here. It's precisely, and this is me copying and pasting, okay, from what the researchers are saying, right? It's precisely because of this difficulty, the process of learning, forgetting, trying to retrieve it, having a hard time, having to go back and look at what it was, and then relearning again, and then testing yourself again. It is this whole process that eventually helps your knowledge to be going into, in a solid way, making the handshake in our long-term memory. All right, so that's why it is hard. And they're saying, any strategy that's too easy is probably a short-term one. That's what the scientists are beginning to say. You may have an immediate burst. You can answer the question, but great. But test you again 2 weeks later, 1 month later, recall is very bad. All right, and we don't want to waste time with that kind of learning. Okay, so in the short term, it's easier not to use these strategies, but in the long term, it pays off. So at BrainFit, it's not easy. We have a whole reward system with our Habit Hero competition, right? Some of our parents, if you are here, we are starting the Habit Hero competition all through September. Every day we want short revision, and then we're going to award them. It's not easy. That's why I think it takes a village to celebrate that, to spur them on, and have, come alongside them, and have these little bite-sized sessions, but that environment to push them along. Yeah. So this is our Habit Hero. This is my daughter, Habit Hero calendar. So and is it achievable? Yes. So I practice this at home. I can tell you that my daughters are working towards a Nintendo for the end of the year, and they get the Nintendo if they study 6 days a week minimally for the whole year. We set this in 1st of January, and this is just another month. So every day they record, and every day we have a reward system. It works well for me, right? I think that's how I'm still able to stay away from tuition as long as I can and still having okay success, with the school results, right? But having the diligence and the habits, right? To do that. Okay, so that's our scholar program, and I just want to tell you that next webinar we will be talking about another system. What if the child doesn't even understand? What if I have a hard time getting them to learn? They're not paying attention. That's another set of skills we're talking about. That is your engagement skills, your recognition networks, your cognitive skills, your thinking skills, right? So many names for it, but it all means the same thing. We will be talking about that, right? So this is a 4-part series. This is the second one. So we'll be talking about cognitive skills, and that's our intelligence, our thinking abilities, problem-solving ability, very important as well. And then in 2 weeks' time, we'll be talking about mindsets, which is important too. They're all important. So thank you. I'll go to the questions, and we have some feedback, right? If you have a question, if you're interested to find out more about our programs, what are we doing, right? Feel free to please give us, give us feedback. All right. So, but you can connect with us on here as well, just to get more information. Yeah. So at this point, I'll go into questions. Nicole, are you there, Nicole? Do we have questions?
Hi.
What do I do? Should
thank you, Cheryl, for a very interesting webinar. Let's see, we have some questions. What's the difference between spaced repetition and retrieval practice?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question.
We both seem to use recall.
Yeah. That's a very common question. Spacing is just spreading out. You can space, but you don't have to do, you may not be retrieving. Maybe let's say, for example, I will read every evening one topic of science. I will read. Okay, so I'm spacing, but I'm not retrieving. You got it? That means I can structure my revision. I will study every day, but what am I doing? I am reading my science notes. That is not a retrieval strategy. But I can study every day, and I take out an assessment book or print a past year paper from the internet and I work on it. That's retrieval. Or I take out my flashcards and ask myself, or I draw a mind map from recall. That's retrieval. Okay, so spacing is about the timing. Retrieval is you just recalling versus studying, sending information in. Okay, so what they're saying is that practice remembering output. All right, so that's the difference. Yeah, Mary. yeah, SNL seems to use recall. Spacing is just the spreading out. Spacing doesn't have a recall component. Spacing is just how often are you going to do it? So how often are you going to revisit? I learned magnets last term. When am I going to learn magnets again? Right? Have you built in magnets into your revision schedule? Right? Maybe 1 month later, do you want to revisit magnets again to see you? So it's about scheduling. Okay, spacing is about scheduling, not necessarily recall. But yes, the spacing helps the recall. Okay, but great questions. Yeah, I think these concepts might be quite new and therefore a little bit harder.
Yeah.
So
Thank
Nick, do
you.
you have another
I
question?
think we have another question on like scheduling of how to study. So can I illustrate more on how we implement? Oops, I lost it. Oops, where did it go?
It went out, is it? Thank you. You're most welcome.
I think it was answered, but let's go to that. I think people are pretty interested in that. Can you illustrate more on how we implement space? Does it mean that a kid learns for 30 minutes and stop to play and then study again for 30 minutes after, or only 30 minutes study per day?
I see. Okay, no. Okay, that's a good question. Let's clarify a little bit, right? Okay, so you have revision practice. Okay, number one, let's do spacing. Okay, so because we are doing habit now, that's another theory. Because we in BrainFit, we want to form a habit, a revision habit. Now, habit says that you have no breaks. You don't have more than a 2-day break in between. That's another theory. Spacing theory doesn't say you must study 7 days. It just simply say revisit. You got to space it out. All right, revisit. Okay, spacing. That's the spacing theory. Now, but in BrainFit, we bring in another theory. We are bringing the habit theory. Habit means you get used to it. You know how when if you do it once a week, I tell you, getting the book out, the inertia just to start that study session. I mean, the child will whine, they procrastinate. But I can tell you, my children now, you give them 5 minutes, they'll go straight into it and do all the questions, right? You get into a habit. Okay, so habits has got some additional benefits, but we're not talking habit here. Habit will be another session altogether, right? But habit theory says you don't have more than 2 days, which is why if you come to BrainFit, we tell the children, you do not have more than 2 days. This is our spacing protocol. You need not have this spacing protocol. You may not have every day free, right? But in BrainFit, we say that you make minimum 5 minutes is fine, right? Because I don't know how much time you have. Now, if you're telling me, look, on the Saturday, I have 1 hour. Can I study for an hour? Sure, you can study for an hour, right? If you are already breaking them down, let's say every day, let's say my daughter is already doing 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 20 minutes, 5 minutes maybe on a bad day, or she skipped that day. And on a Saturday, I have time, I do an hour. Is that okay? Yes, that's fine. But if you are not doing anything, but just putting 2 hours into Saturday, then they say, space it out. You know what I mean? The issue is not that you're doing 2 hours here, is that if you are not doing here. So if you compare the 2 hours on the Saturday, it's less effective than spreading it out. Got it? So it doesn't mean that you can't have a longer study session. A study session, I think it can go up to 1 hour. It depends on the age of the child, their attention span. But 1 hour is decent, right? I mean, for middle school, I guess, right? If you're younger, 30-minute sessions are fine, right? But it is more the whole structure. Okay, I hope I am able to answer and clarify on that. Am I making sense, Nick? I hope I'm making sense.
Right. You want to try to create habits so
spacing.
that it's easier. I think there was one more question on how to make exams less miserable for their boys. So I think it's a lot of habit creating.
I can tell you
when you're young.
Yeah, I think children can go into an exam situation with a bit of excitement. You know when they are well prepared. I can tell you it's really the preparation. The more prepared you are, the more the confidence will rise. The more they will go in with the optimism, with a bit of excitement. Can I score this? Can I ace this? I want to check as well. It's all about preparation. So I think the dread comes from when we push back, we have already forgotten, and now we have all these chapters to revise. We are already stressed, and then things fall apart. Right? Because we don't have this structure, which is why I think this conversation is so important, right? That we can make it better. And if we just take away the idea of studying for the exam, We study, period, right? And we study by looking at how the brain remembers, period, right? Then we have all these things, all from day one of school. We're going to start, cultivating these habits, slowly pushing information into long-term memory, chasing after the error points, the weak links. They are the stress links for the children. They're errors, right? Go after them. Don't assume a correction is just going to get them to where they want to be. I think if we do all this, we can send kids into the exam hall with greater confidence and anticipation in a positive way. Right. I think, so that would be my recommendation, that we go after learning, right? If we want to remove the dread, and we should. Exams should not be dreaded. It is just a measure. I mean, I truly believe it. I believe it with every fiber of my being. I welcome exams. If the teacher is giving them a pop quiz, today without revising, I think it's great. And I never complain that, oh, they tested you. I love pop things, because have you learned? I'm not learning for a certain date, you see. So that's why every time they come in and say, today you're just going to have a spelling test, you did not even revise, I love them. I think it's good, because I want to know, have I really learned? I'm not learning for that spelling test, because if I am, then it's short term, right? I mean, it could be short term, I don't know. So when you have that mode, and when the family has that mode, I mean, to me, they come back and say, "Oh, there's a pop quiz." I'll say, "Great, how did you go?" And then we don't complain about it. We don't look at it with dread, because you should be prepared. There's no date. There's no exam date, right? I think I better end here. I keep talking, Nick.
Yeah, but I think the drive home is really preparing, and having habits to get studying going without having to cram at the last minute on the bus.
Absolutely. Sorry, I'm just looking through. We got science questions.
I think there are a few people wanting to know if we have the webinar recorded.
And we have a link. We will. Look out for your email. Now, your email may end up in the spam box. Please put us in your friendly contacts list. Because we will email you in by next week with the link once the video is up, so you can access it at the resources site. Yes, Dorothy, preparation is really the key. Let's end this, Nicole, so we don't hold everybody back.
Okay, thank you everyone for
attending. Put the question into, if you really want us to get back to you, right? We have this link, okay? Sorry, we cannot get through all the questions, but it is over time, so we end it, Nick.
Yeah. Okay. So if you guys have any burning questions, you can always fill up the form, and we'll get back to you with the the answers. Yeah. So we'll end the webinar now.
Yeah. Okay. Bye-bye. Keep safe, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you. See you next 2 weeks. Bye. Bye, everyone. Thanks, panelists. Thanks, Nicole. Bye.
Thank you.